Welcome back, everyone, to part two of our epic 10-part series on the Napoleonic Wars. In the previous episode, we saw how General Napoleon Bonaparte transformed himself into Emperor Napoleon I. We watched Europe react with fear as Britain, Austria, and Russia formed the Third Coalition against France. By 1805, the continent stood on the edge of a war that would reshape Europe forever. Today, we dive into one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history. This is the story of the lightning-fast Ulm campaign, the naval disaster at Trafalgar, and the legendary Battle of Austerlitz, the so-called Battle of the Three Emperors. In just a few months, Napoleon would destroy one enemy army without a major battle, lose control of the seas forever, and then achieve what many historians consider the greatest tactical victory of his entire career. This episode has everything: massive troop movements, strategic deception, desperate retreats, naval warfare, political collapse, and battlefield genius. Get ready for maps, tactics, dramatic decisions, and the rise of Napoleon at the absolute height of his power. And if you enjoy deep historical documentaries like this, make sure to subscribe now, because we still have 8 massive chapters ahead. Now, let's return to Europe in the year 1805. During the summer of 1805, Napoleon was preparing for something enormous. For nearly 2 years, over 180,000 French soldiers had been gathered near the French coast at Boulogne. Officially, this army was training for an invasion of Britain. But across Europe, the balance of power was changing. Britain had successfully convinced Austria and Russia to join a new coalition against France. British gold funded the alliance. Austria prepared its armies. Russia mobilized thousands of troops under General Mikhail Kutuzov. The goal was simple: crush Napoleon before French domination became unstoppable. The Austrian high command believed France was still focused on Britain. They expected Napoleon to remain near the English Channel for months. That assumption would become a disaster. Napoleon's Grande Armée was unlike any army Europe had ever seen. Instead of one massive slow-moving force, Napoleon organized his troops into independent corps. Each corps had infantry, cavalry, artillery, engineers, and supply units. Each could fight alone for a short time while remaining close enough to support the others. It was a revolutionary system. The army consisted of legendary commanders: Marshal Davout, cold, disciplined, and relentless; Marshal Ney, aggressive and fearless; Marshal Soult, one of Napoleon's finest tacticians; Marshal Lannes, tough, experienced, and fiercely loyal; Marshal Murat, flamboyant cavalry commander with unmatched energy; and above all, Berthier, Napoleon's brilliant chief of staff, who transformed the emperor's ideas into precise military orders. On August 26, 1805, Napoleon made his move. In one of the greatest strategic redeployments in military history, the Grande Armée suddenly abandoned the coast and marched east toward Germany. The speed was unbelievable. French soldiers marched between 20 and 30 miles per day. Entire corps crossed rivers, forests, and mountain roads with astonishing coordination. In only a few weeks, the French army covered nearly 450 miles. The Austrians had no idea what was coming. Napoleon later said, "The strength of an army is in movement." And in 1805, movement became his deadliest weapon. General Karl Mack commanded the main Austrian army in Bavaria. He had between 70,000 and 80,000 men positioned around the city of Ulm near the Danube River. Mack believed he had time. He expected Russian reinforcements to arrive before Napoleon could fully deploy his forces, but Napoleon was already moving faster than anyone imagined possible. Instead of attacking directly from the west, the French executed a gigantic turning movement. The Grande Armée crossed the Rhine north of the Austrian positions, swung eastward, and then turned south behind Mack's army. It was a massive strategic trap. On October 6th, Murat and Lannes captured Augsburg. Between October 8th and 10th, French forces secured critical crossings over the Danube. Marshal Ney fought brutal engagements around Elchingen. Soult moved rapidly to cut Austrian escape routes. Davout guarded the southern flank. Every French corps moved like part of a giant machine. Meanwhile, confusion spread through the Austrian headquarters. Reports contradicted each other. French troops appeared where they were not supposed to exist. Communication failed. Panic grew. Mack still believed he could escape, But by mid-October, the French encirclement was complete. Napoleon had trapped an entire enemy army before fighting a decisive battle. Thousands of Austrian soldiers surrendered in smaller engagements. French cavalry patrols blocked roads in every direction. Artillery surrounded Ulm. Then came the final collapse. On October 20th, 1805, General Mack surrendered. Roughly 27,000 Austrian soldiers laid down their weapons. Tens of thousands more had already been captured or scattered. The French seized huge quantities of artillery, ammunition, and supplies. French losses were astonishingly small. The campaign shocked Europe. Without a massive pitched battle, Napoleon had destroyed one of Austria's principal armies in only a few weeks. Military historians still study Ulm today as one of the greatest examples of operational warfare ever executed. The Austrian Emperor, Francis II, was horrified. The road to Vienna was now open, and the Russian army was still far away. But while Napoleon was dominating Europe on land, a completely different battle was unfolding at sea, and there the story would end very differently. For years, Napoleon had dreamed of invading Britain. To succeed, France needed temporary control of the English Channel. The French fleet, combined with Spanish naval forces, attempted to lure the Royal Navy away and create an opening for invasion. But Britain possessed one enormous advantage: Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. Nelson was already a legend. Aggressive, unconventional, and fearless, he believed British naval discipline and gunnery could defeat larger fleets. On October 21st, 1805, near Cape Trafalgar off the coast of Spain, Nelson encountered the combined Franco-Spanish fleet commanded by Admiral Villeneuve. The Allies had 33 ships of the line. The British had only 27. Under normal naval doctrine, fleets formed parallel battle lines. Nelson ignored convention. Instead of fighting side by side, he divided his fleet into attacking columns and sailed directly into the enemy line. It was an incredibly dangerous maneuver. As the British ships advanced, they absorbed devastating cannon fire. But once they broke through the line, chaos exploded across the battlefield. British crews fired faster. British gunnery proved more accurate. British sailors overwhelmed ship after ship. The battle lasted roughly 4 hours. When it ended, the Franco-Spanish fleet had been shattered. More than 20 enemy ships were captured or destroyed. Britain did not lose a single ship of the line, but victory came at a terrible price. During the fighting, Nelson was shot by a French marksman aboard the Redoutable. The bullet struck his shoulder and spine. As the battle raged above him, Nelson lay dying below deck aboard HMS Victory. His final words became immortal: "Thank God I have done my duty." Nelson died a national hero. Trafalgar changed world history. After 1805, Napoleon would never seriously threaten Britain by sea again. The Royal Navy became master of the oceans for more than a century. Even as France conquered much of continental Europe, Britain remained untouchable behind its fleet. Napoleon reportedly admitted, "The English are masters of the sea." From this point forward, the war would become primarily continental. After the victory at Ulm, Napoleon advanced deeper into Central Europe with incredible speed. On November 13th, French cavalry under Murat entered Vienna. The Austrian capital fell with surprisingly little resistance. The Habsburg court fled. Napoleon established headquarters at Schönbrunn Palace and prepared for the next stage of the war. But the conflict was not over. The Russian army under General Kutuzov remained in the field. Kutuzov understood the danger. He wanted to avoid a decisive battle and continue retreating until additional Russian forces arrived. But political pressure changed everything. Tsar Alexander I personally joined the army. Young, ambitious, and eager for glory, the Tsar favored aggressive action. Many Austrian officers also demanded battle. They believed Napoleon's army was exhausted and vulnerable. Napoleon carefully encouraged this belief. Near the town of Austerlitz in modern-day Czechia, the French emperor deliberately weakened his own right flank. He withdrew troops from key positions. He allowed enemy scouts to observe apparent weakness. He even appeared uncertain during negotiations. It was all part of a trap. Napoleon studied the battlefield carefully. At the center stood the Pratzen Heights, a plateau dominating the entire area. Napoleon predicted the Allies would attempt to crush his supposedly weak right flank. If they moved enough troops away from the center, the Pratzen Heights would become exposed. That was exactly what he wanted. The French army numbered around 73,000 men with 139 guns. The Allied Russian and Austrian army fielded roughly 85,000 troops and nearly 300 artillery pieces. On paper, the coalition possessed the advantage, but Napoleon believed he controlled something more important: timing. December the 2nd, 1805. Exactly 1 year after Napoleon crowned himself emperor. The morning began with heavy fog covering the battlefield. Then the sun rose through the mist. French veterans would forever remember it as the Sun of Austerlitz. The Allied army launched its attack early. Large Russian and Austrian columns moved southward against the French right flank near the villages of Telnitz and Sokolnitz. The fighting was brutal. Marshal Davout's corps had marched extraordinary distances to reach the battlefield in time. His exhausted soldiers arrived one division at a time and immediately entered combat. For hours, they held the line against superior numbers. From a distance, it appeared the coalition plan was working. Then came the decisive moment. Around 9 a.m., Napoleon turned to Marshal Soult. According to legend, he asked, "How long will it take your men to reach the heights?" Soult replied, "Less than 20 minutes, sire." Napoleon gave the order. Soult's corps surged forward through the fog and smashed directly into the weakened Allied center on the Pratzen Heights. The attack achieved complete surprise. Russian and Austrian units were caught redeploying. Fierce fighting erupted across the plateau. French infantry advanced with terrifying discipline. Artillery blasted gaps through Allied formations. Bayonet charges shattered resistance. Within a short time, the French captured the heights. The coalition army was split in two. Panic spread across the battlefield. To the north, massive cavalry engagements exploded between Murat's horsemen and the Russian Imperial Guard cavalry. Thousands of armored riders clashed in clouds of smoke, mud, and snow. At one critical moment, the Russian Imperial Guard launched a dangerous counterattack. French units wavered. Napoleon personally committed the Imperial Guard cavalry to stabilize the situation. The battle reached its peak. Meanwhile, the Allied southern columns suddenly realized they were trapped. French artillery now dominated the battlefield from the heights. As coalition forces attempted retreat, confusion turned into catastrophe. One of the most famous moments of the battle involved frozen ponds near the southern sector. French artillery fired onto the ice while retreating troops crossed. For generations, dramatic paintings showed thousands drowning beneath the frozen surface. Modern historians believe the actual numbers were smaller than Napoleonic propaganda claimed, but the psychological impact was enormous. By late afternoon, the Allied army had collapsed. The defeat was devastating. The coalition lost roughly 27,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. The French suffered around 9,000 casualties. More importantly, Napoleon had annihilated the strategic position of the Third Coalition. Tsar Alexander I retreated in shock. Emperor Francis II sought peace. Kutuzov barely escaped with the surviving Russian forces. As the battle ended, Napoleon looked across the field and reportedly declared, "This is the finest day of my life." Many historians agree. Austerlitz is still considered one of the greatest battlefield victories ever achieved. It combined deception, timing, terrain, discipline, and concentrated force with extraordinary precision. At Austerlitz, Napoleon reached the absolute peak of his military genius. The consequences of Austerlitz transformed Europe. On December 26, 1805, Austria signed the Treaty of Pressburg. The Habsburg Empire lost major territories and paid enormous financial penalties. French allies gained land and influence, but an even bigger shock followed. For nearly 1,000 years, the Holy Roman Empire had existed in Central Europe. It was ancient, fragmented, and politically complicated. Now it effectively collapsed under the pressure of Napoleon's victories. In 1806, Emperor Francis II dissolved the empire entirely. The political structure that had dominated German lands since the Middle Ages disappeared. Napoleon reorganized many German states into the Confederation of the Rhine, a French-controlled alliance serving as a buffer zone in Central Europe. French influence now stretched across much of the continent. At the end of 1805, Napoleon seemed unstoppable. He had destroyed Austria's main army. He had captured Vienna. He had defeated Russia in a decisive battle. He had reshaped the political map of Europe. Yet hidden beneath these victories were future problems. Trafalgar ensured Britain would continue resisting. French expansion frightened every remaining European power. and one kingdom in particular had watched the events of 1805 with growing alarm. Prussia. For months, Prussia remained neutral. But after witnessing Napoleon's growing dominance in Germany, the Prussian monarchy prepared for war. And in the next chapter, Europe would witness another lightning campaign. In part 3, we'll see how Napoleon crushes Prussia in only weeks at Jena and Austerlitz, how brutal winter warfare pushes the French army to its limits, and how two emperors finally meet face-to-face on a raft in the middle of the Niemen River. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe, and comment. Austerlitz. Which battle impressed you the most? Trafalgar, or Austerlitz? Thank you for watching, and we'll continue the story in part 3. The Fourth Coalition, the lightning defeat of Prussia, the bloody war with Russia, and the Peace of Tilsit.